Hello everybody, welcome to this week's RC Bytes. Today I want to talk to you about the cost approach and how revenue, company structure, and really everything else except for what the shareholder does day to day is not relevant when calculating the reasonable compensation. Let's start off with a quick summary, and this slide will really explain everything that I want to get across to you today. When using the cost approach to analyze reasonable compensation, all you need to know are what the owner's duties are. It doesn't matter the revenue of the company, it doesn't matter the size of the company, it doesn't matter the shareholder percentage. All that matters are the duties, and that's what you need to focus on when calculating reasonable compensation for the cost approach. Now, let me give you a few different examples here. Let's run through some scenarios. First, here we have Phil Dunphy. He's the owner of Phil Dunphy Real Estate. Now, here are some stats about his company along with his duties. If you remember from last week's RC Bytes, we talked about how to determine whether or not to use the cost approach, market approach, or income approach. We used this decision tree to decide that. Let's do this here again today by quickly looking and asking ourselves the question whether or not Phil does multiple things within the company. As you recall from the last slide, he does. So the cost approach is the correct method for us to use. So we enter his duties into RC reports, and here is his reasonable compensation report calculated. Next, as you saw, Phil had a great year and there was a merger. Phil Dunphy has merged his real estate agency with Gil Thorpe, and they had a fantastic year after their merger. You'll see the merger. Phil has 60% of the company. Gil has 40%. You'll see their revenue, their employees all doubled. And below, you'll also see the different roles that both Phil and Gil have within the company. Now, calculating reasonable compensation for Phil, a lot happened this year. But let's go through our decision tree. All we need to focus on is the fact that he performs a variety of roles within the company. We're going to use the cost approach. And here is his reasonable compensation report. You'll likely notice it's a little lower than last year, and that is because we do look at the market in the area that is in. And from 2020 to 2021, the real estate market did go down, and so realtors were paid less, meaning his reasonable compensation was less. And you'll see that in a summary here in a couple slides. Next year, 2022, a little bit of a hard year for real estate. You'll see that Phil and Gil don't wear suits and ties anymore. They look a little more scruffy. It was a hard year. They went from 30 million to 10 million in revenue. They laid off a lot of their employees, but their duties in the company remain the same. So, with that being the case, what methodology are we going to use when calculating reasonable compensation? Let's look at the decision tree. We'll see that it is the cost approach again. And here is Phil's reasonable compensation report for 2022. Now, here's a summary of what we saw over these last 3 years from 2020, 2021, 2022. You'll see the events that occurred. You'll see the reasonable compensation that that Phil paid himself during those years. Now, what I want to ask you is when your client comes to you and gives you a big list of events, such as revenue, growth, employees, shareholder, distribution model, whatever it is, when we're using the cost approach to calculate reasonable compensation, none of them matter. All that we need to focus on are the duties, and this can be tricky. The shareholders, I've heard different scenarios where the shareholders are married. 1% to one person, 99% for another person. I've heard different distribution models. And none of these things matter because with reasonable compensation, we pay the reasonable compensation first, and after that's paid out, all of the distribution models, all of the different company models, that's when they come into play. But reasonable compensation is paid based off of what the shareholder is doing day to day within the company. Now, if you have any questions about this or about anything else, please feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to discuss different scenarios or clarify any questions you may have and help in any way to make it so that your reasonable compensation calculations are accurate and easy to do. Thank you everybody for joining this week.